Emma is a novel about youthful hubris and romantic misunderstandings, written by Jane Austen. It is set in the fictional country village of Highbury and the surrounding estates of Hartfield, Randalls and Donwell Abbey, and involves the relationships among people from a small number of families. The novel was first published in December 1815. As in her other novels, Austen explores the concerns and difficulties of genteel women living in Georgian Regency England. Emma is a comedy of manners. Although convinced that she herself will never marry, Emma Woodhouse, a precocious 20-year-old resident of the village of Highbury, imagines herself to be naturally gifted in conjuring love matches. After self-declared success at matchmaking between her governess and Mr. Weston, a village widower, Emma takes it upon herself to find an eligible match for her new friend, Harriet Smith. Though Harriet's parentage is unknown, Emma is convinced that Harriet deserves to be a gentleman's wife and sets her friend's sights on Mr. Elton, the village vicar. Meanwhile, Emma persuades Harriet to reject the proposal of Robert Martin, a well-to-do farmer for whom Harriet clearly has feelings. Harriet becomes infatuated with Mr. Elton under Emma's encouragement, but Emma's plans go awry when Elton makes it clear that his affection is for Emma, not Harriet. Emma realizes that her obsession with making a match for Harriet has blinded her to the true nature of the situation. Mr. Knightley, Emma's brother-in-law and treasured friend, watches Emma's matchmaking efforts with a critical eye. He believes that Mr. Martin is a worthy young man whom Harriet would be lucky to marry. He and Emma quarrel over Emma's meddling, and, as usual, Mr. Knightley proves to be the wiser of the pair. Elton, spurned by Emma and offended by her insinuation that Harriet is his equal, leaves for the town of Bath and marries a girl there almost immediately. Emma is left to comfort Harriet and to wonder about the character of a new visitor expected in Highbury, Mr. Weston's son, Frank Churchill. Frank is set to visit his father in Highbury after having been raised by his aunt and uncle in London, who have taken him as their heir. Emma knows nothing about Frank, who has long been deterred from visiting his father by his aunt's illnesses and complaints. Mr. Knightley is immediately suspicious of the young man, especially after Frank rushes back to London merely to have his hair cut. Emma, however, finds Frank delightful and notices that his charms are directed mainly toward her. Though she plans to discourage these charms, she finds herself flattered and engaged in a flirtation with the young man. Emma greets Jane Fairfax, another addition to the Highbury set, with less enthusiasm. Jane is beautiful and accomplished, but Emma dislikes her because of her reserve and, the narrator insinuates, because she is jealous of Jane. Suspicion, intrigue, and misunderstandings ensue. Mr. Knightley defends Jane, saying that she deserves compassion because, unlike Emma, she has no independent fortune and must soon leave home to work as a governess. Mrs. Weston suspects that the warmth of Mr. Knightley's defense comes from romantic feelings, an implication Emma resists. Everyone assumes that Frank and Emma are forming an attachment, though Emma soon dismisses Frank as a potential suitor and imagines him as a match for Harriet. At a village ball, Knightley earns Emma's approval by offering to dance with Harriet, who has just been humiliated by Mr. Elton and his new wife. The next day, Frank saves Harriet from gypsy beggars. When Harriet tells Emma that she has fallen in love with a man above her social station, Emma believes that she means Frank. Knightley begins to suspect that Frank and Jane have a secret understanding, and he attempts to warn Emma. Emma laughs at Knightley's suggestion and loses Knightley's approval when she flirts with Frank and insults Miss Bates, a kind-hearted spinster and Jane's aunt, at a picnic. When Knightley reprimands Emma, she weeps. News comes that Frank's aunt has died, and this event paves the way for an unexpected revelation that slowly solves the mysteries. Frank and Jane have been secretly engaged, his attentions to Emma have been a screen to hide his true preference. With his aunt's death and his uncle's approval, Frank can now marry Jane, the woman he loves. Emma worries that Harriet will be crushed, but she soon discovers that it is Knightley, not Frank, who is the object of Harriet's affection. Harriet believes that Knightley shares her feelings. Emma finds herself upset by Harriet's revelation, and her distress forces her to realize that she is in love with Knightley. Emma expects Knightley to tell her he loves Harriet, but, to her delight, Knightley declares his love for Emma. Harriet is soon comforted by a second proposal from Robert Martin, which she accepts. The novel ends with the marriage of Harriet and Mr. Martin and that of Emma and Mr. Knightley, resolving the question of who loves whom after all. Emma is a young woman who is self-assured and who enjoys meddling in people's love lives. She credits herself for Mr. and Mrs. Weston, previously Miss Taylor, getting married. Her perceived success with them boosts her confidence into conceitedness, and she goes too far when she manipulates Harriet. In some ways, Emma can help Harriet, given Harriet's lower social status. However, when it comes to Harriet's love life, Emma inflicts painful damage. Emma believes that Robert, as a farmer, is too low for Harriet. Meanwhile, Harriet's parentage was unknown for much of the book. Emma assumed she was from a higher family, but, in the end, it is discovered that Harriet's father was a tradesman, putting her at a lower social rank than Robert. After she dissuades Harriet from Robert, who Harriet does like, Emma convinces her friend to set her sights on Mr. Elton. Harriet is easily persuaded, and she quickly develops strong feelings for Mr. Elton. Harriet is a follower, and she looks up to Emma, following her guidance. Emma, though, is not correct. It is herself, not Harriet, who Mr. Elton intends to marry. This hurts Harriet for quite some time. She recovers eventually after she develops feelings for Mr. Knightley. Thinking Harriet likes Frank, Emma encourages the feelings, not knowing the truth. Yet again, Harriet is crushed when the man she loves chooses Emma. At the end of the novel, when both women get their happy endings, their friendship devolves, and they become acquaintances, rather than close friends. Before the truth between Frank and Jane comes out, Emma and Frank have a close relationship, and their family and friends expect that they will get married. Most everyone supports the idea, except for Mr. Knightley. Knightley is jealous because he loves Emma, and he is strongly biased against Frank. His negative feelings are not unfounded, though. Frank has a bad influence on Emma. His jesting attitude pushes her into openly mocking Jane, and, at one point, Miss Bates. He later confesses that he used Emma as a cover. He figured if people thought he intended to propose to Emma, they would not suspect he was already engaged to Jane Fairfax. Emma, whose feelings for Frank did not last, forgives him at the end of the novel. She also becomes good friends with Jane. Jane, as it turns out, is not naturally quiet and reserved. She had just felt that Emma might have won over Frank's heart. The relationship between Frank and Emma is a stark contrast to the one between Emma and Mr. Knightley. Where Frank incites rudeness and mockery, Mr. Knightley pushes Emma to better herself and to treat her friends kindly. Mr. Knightley has the best intentions in his heart, whereas Frank only wishes to use Emma. Emma, like most of Austen's novels, is a study in 18th-century English society and the significance of propriety. The rich and well-bred control the social situations, issuing and initiating invitations and friendships. Those of low social standing depend upon the charity and initiative of those in the higher class. When violations of this order occur, they are often met with great indignation by those of genteel breeding, as when Emma takes offense at Mrs. Elton presuming to nickname Mr. Knightley. Social class also dictates the social obligations between the characters, and the way in which their actions respond to these obligations reveals their character. The novel, for instance, teases out the nuances of charity regarding class. Emma is charitable towards the poor, but shows little initiative in befriending the orphaned and talented Jane. The characters' use or abuse of their social standing reveals much about their kindness or cruelty. For instance, Emma's exercise of wit at the expense of the silly, but low-standing Miss Bates is condemned as cruel by Mr. Knightley because it is an abuse of her social clout. Humiliating the hapless Miss Bates sets a bad example for those in society who would follow her example. On the other hand, Mr. Knightley's asking Harriet to dance after she has been snubbed by Mr. Elton is an act of charity, graciousness. and chivalry because he is of a high social standing in comparison to both her and Mr. Elton. His act socially saves Harriet and reprimands the Eltons for their rudeness. Social class also restricts the actions that characters are able to take in fulfilling their desires, as is most evidently seen in the novel's drama regarding marriage matches. Frank must conceal his engagement with Jane because she is an orphan and regarded as an unsuitable social match by his family. Harriet rejects Robert Martin because Emma advises her that he is beneath her. Mr. Elton rejects Harriet by the same calculations, and so on. Emma is the culmination of Austen's ability to make great art about the most everyday material. She can create this amazing classical comedy with characters who really live in our imagination.